I like to use this little abbreviation, DOCRA DPP, because it covers every letter, all 5 purposes. So the purposes of sanctions are as follows: deterrence, denunciation, rehabilitation, protection, and punishment. But first, I like to look at the types of sanctions because I think that makes it a little bit more clear. So what are the ways a person can be punished by the criminal justice system? So there are fines. This is an amount of money ordered to be paid by the offender to the state of Victoria. So everyone should know what a fine is, but it's all to do with an amount of money. This is the most lenient type of sanction. There is community corrections order, which is more serious than a fine, but less serious than imprisonment. A CCO is a supervised sentence served in the community that includes special conditions. So maybe you associate it with a movie that you watch and the person's wearing an ankle bracelet and they're stuck at home and they can't go anywhere. That would be an example of a CCO. So basically, this is where the offender doesn't go to prison. They may not be contained within their house, but they may just be allowed to serve their sentence in the community as well. And there will be certain conditions that the judge sets for each offender. Some conditions every offender has to follow, like you can't leave the state of Victoria. Other conditions are special conditions that are set for each offender. Place prohibitions, places you can't go to, people you can't visit. That may be to do with, licensed venues where you can buy alcohol, gambling, people that were victims, etc. Community work, unpaid community work of a certain amount of hours is usually the most common, etc., etc. And imprisonment is what we typically think when we think about the criminal justice system. It is the most serious sanction, removing the offender from society for a stated period of time and placing them in prison. Okay. So the purposes of sanctions, what do they aim to do? And you need to be able to discuss basically how each type of sanction does or does not achieve each purpose. So you need to look for strengths and weaknesses. Now, deterrence is a process by which the sanction aims to discourage the offender and others in the community from committing similar offenses. So when it discourages the offender directly, it's called specific deterrence. It aims to specifically deter the offender. And when it's aiming to do that for the community, it's called general deterrence. So you can make points for both. Okay, so how do we discourage the offender? Well, obviously, imprisonment and CCOs and fines all aim to do that. Financial loss can be hard-hitting, but not if you're wealthy, so that's a weakness. Imprisonment is a really harsh punishment. A CCO is unpaid community work, that's punishment. So all of these things aim to discourage. How do we discourage? Well, the judge would decide to give whatever's closest to the maximum sentence or the maximum sentence to the offender to basically say, I'm going to punish you as much as possible so you don't do this ever again. So we can increase the sentence to help achieve it. Increase the fine, increase the number of conditions and length of the CCO. Now, denunciation, don't confuse these, is where the court demonstrates the community's disapproval of the offender's actions and condemns them, usually done for particularly awful crimes. And the judge basically just comments and speaks out to the community on how the accused actions were unacceptable. And they will also impose the largest sentence or punishment that they possibly can. So instead of a CCO, for example, they would impose imprisonment for this offender. Rehabilitation strategies designed to reform an offender in order to prevent recidivism, prevent reoffending in the future. So fines are awful at rehabilitation, as we can imagine, because you just pay it and it goes away. in prison is really bad because it's sort of like viewed as like a crime school even, and people often come out worse. They've lost their employment, finances. When they come back out into the community, they usually just end up in jail. 40% within the next 2 years after release usually just end up in jail again. But they do achieve rehabilitation by having some rehabilitation programs within jails. And CCOs are most effective at rehabilitation because it's more lenient than imprisonment. So it keeps the convicted offender out of that awful prison environment. And it includes conditions such as community work, and also it might include things like rehab as well. You have to go to rehab, you have to be subject to drug testing, etc. Conditions that help to rehabilitate. And it allows them to stay in the community. And of course, we have protection and punishment, which are self explanatory. As we can imagine, imprisonment is best at achieving protection because the um, offender is in prison and not in the community. Fines cannot achieve protection whatsoever. And punishment is most effectively achieved by imprisonment as well. So a lot of this I've actually talked about. This is more of a table for you to use. You need to basically, this is what you need to be able to do for questions, but you need a lot more points, okay, as to how each of the doctrine DPP is achieved or is not achieved by each of the types of sanctions.